So welcome back. This is part 3 of the Pug build. Now, so I've got my basic structure of my wing. I'm now going to sand all of that and make sure it's ready for covering. I am going to do a special piece about doing one of these sort of see-through out transparency type looks, so I will talk you through that. Now, I've got my fuselage just to sand, so I'm going to be sanding all that. Little tip here, when you're actually sanding the canopy, is always just put a little bit of masking tape, just a thin strip around there, and it means it's not moving about when you're doing the sanding. So I've got that to sand up as well, and I have decided, I think you already knew, but we're going res. So we're going for the res tail, hence I don't need the launch peg because I've got a Pug with a which is discus launchable anyway. So I've got that tail, which I'm going to need to sand. Don't go mad on that. It's just a little bit of sort of, you know, aerofoil leading edge, a little bit of the trailing edge, which is quite thin already. And obviously then I've got my res tail plane as well. So what I intend to do is I'm sanding all of these. When I've got the tail plane ready, then we're going to talk through the structures of doing putting the boom on with all the fittings and actually fitting it. But I thought it'd be quite a good idea. What I'd like to do is get it all covered. Now, one last top tip. My advice is, when you've finished your wing, make sure that your wing bolts actually align properly now. So check that fitting now, because when you've got it all covered, it's going to be a right pain to try and sort out. Because obviously, don't forget, we've already tack glued this at the back. So let's get that sorted, that wing attachment sorted now, before we do any major covering. Okay, so I've done some sanding, and I've done some colouring in. Most of it you'll see in a moment. Anyway, so the next thing we've got to think about doing is adding the boom to the fuselage, and with all the extras that go with it. And when I say all the extras that go with it, I think the picture's the best way for me to describe it. We've got these 3D printed custom made pushrod guides and the tail plane mount, and bearing in mind that mine is going to be the res version, so the dimensions are there for us to actually spread out those spaces and the length of the boom. So I've got my boom already. I've not glued this yet, but I just wanted to talk through the process. So the idea is because there's one thing I nearly slipped up on your elevator, sorry, the tailplane mount here, you'll notice that on one side there's a little guide wire that comes out. Now that is actually for you to for the wire to come out. So just remember, you've got the horn elevator hole the right side. What you don't want to do is suddenly find out you slid this up and then the wire comes out this side for the elevator, and your elevator horn is on the other side. So just something to bear in mind with your thought process when you're putting it all together. So there's that, and then also we've got these 3 push guides. So what I'm going to do, my plan of action is, I'm going to fit this first. This is going to get glued on in place. I'm going to pop the horn in place. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my tail plane with this in the right orientation. So remember that the flared bit that you can see, that flared bit there, that's got to go at the back. So the idea is I'm going to just stick that on there like so. That's going to go on there, and at the moment it's free running. I'm not doing any gluing. So and then make sure I've got my elevator set up, and then once I'm happy with that, what I think I might going to do is these will all get glued in place, but what I am going to do is I'm going to glue these in place to make sure that these are all square, so the fin is 90 degrees to the tailplane, when I'm happy with that, then I'm going to slide everything else on. Now, the reason I'm being quite careful there is, if you're adding this with Sino, what you don't want is any Sino wicking down here, because if the Sino wicks down here, these are going to get absolutely ruined, and you just have to be very, very careful how you're going to glue those. In fact, I'm not quite sure how I am going to glue them at the moment, but when I get to it, I'll let you know. And if you hear a load of swear words, it might have gone pear-shaped. So anyway, I'm waffling. Once I've done that, I've also made sure I've put my wires down just to make sure they all run. Then we're going to slide this in to the fuselage and get this square with the wings mounted. Okay, so a little bit of an update. I've suddenly realised that this actual video is going to be a little bit wordy, but bear with me on this, because some people have asked me for particular techniques that I've done. So the only other thing we need to talk about is the fuselage, installing the gear. Couple of little top tips here. As you can see, I've got my wire guides. They are not stuck on at the moment. So at the moment I fed my wires through. Another little top tip, I gave my wires a liberal spraying and rubbing with a bit of silicone spray. And what I'm going to do now, let me talk you through this little step here. Well, what's that? Was a servo. Cut. Oh, shit me. Right. Right, so what I'm going to do with this is, I've got the wires in, nothing's glued permanent at the moment. Just let these slide about. These are going to be the last thing you actually attach to the boom after you've got the servos in. So my next step is, I've got my little horns like so. Just get the end of the wire and make sure that the wire goes through. So what I'm now going to do is, I'm going to bend my little elbow at the end of this. I'm then going to feed it back down, and I'm then going to glue these in place so that the horn is glued in, connected to the push rod. Having done that, I'll have a massive length this end, and then what I want to do is, the servos I'm using, as I just happen to have some Emax, I'm using Emax ES92512s. Now, if you go on the Angel Wings website, Andy has actually bought specific servos that you can buy from Andy. The other nice thing is, they are an analog servo, so if you're going to be a cheapskate and not buy, I just can't do the soldering on them little ESCs. I'm just going to be using either a 650 single cell 3.7 volt battery up in the front. So my advice is, you will see some pictures of the servos in that bit there. That's a rough guide. So I've actually done a little bit of experimenting with my servos, and actually, if you see that red line that I've put just there, I know now that's the furthest forward that those servos can go, because otherwise I'm either going to have to cut this bit off here to get my batteries in. So just those little things you just need to think about. So the next process is, I'm then going to bend the mark where I need to bend the elbows. I'm going to bend the elbows, I'm going to connect the servos, then I'm going to use the tiniest little bit of hot glue. So I will then clamp these in place so they're neutral. Then I'm just going to sit the servos down, and then when I'm completely happy with the run, then we'll think about actually gluing these. But I am not going to be using super glue. What I intend to do with mine is, I am just going to paint the tiniest little bit of alphatic glue that I like, and then when it's in place, I'm just going to slide the push rod up to it. But do not touch these until you've got all your servos running properly, because if these are glued at the moment, it means that you're not going to get the straight run on your push rods. I'm sorry that's a bit wordy, but I thought it was worth explaining, because I do get a lot of emails and messages, people asking me on certain bits of the installation. So I hope that's covered it. Okay, so we've just a little bit of a chat about the covering of the Pug V2. I would say that actually it's the most requested question I get is how did I do the Pug 1. So let's talk about the Pug 1 and I'll tell you about how I've upped it a little bit on the Pug 2. Pug 1 literally was just Sharpie, black felt tip Sharpie, just on the end of the ribs because I wanted it to look like one of my son's hang gliders, and that is quite an expensive clear solar film covering, I think it was I got. Now, over a year's gone by, what have I done with this one? Literally all I did was I went to my local garage and bought a cheap can of spray paint. Took my time, just had the wing holding it on a very long screwdriver and then just went backwards and forwards. But I did about 2 or 3 coats, but very, very fine. So I held the can sort of, you know, quite a fair way away and just worked it up and down. Let that dry and did it a couple of times again. Little tip, if you're going to do any other colour than black, you need to concentrate on the spar, because obviously the spar and the trailing edge are black. So I should think the easiest way of doing it is doing black. So that's just orange car paint. The ribs, again, the centre inter ribs are just a Sharpie. Sat down one evening watching the TV, just doing that. And then this is the new gloss feather colour from Angel Wings Designs. It's cracking. It's very, like you've seen it on my other model, got the slightly more matte finish, but this with the gloss is cracking. One little tip: if when you finish doing your covering and you think to yourself it almost looks like you've got some moisture underneath, and you come back the next day and that hasn't changed, just run the iron over, because what you've actually got left there is just shows up a little bit of the adhesive. So I had one little patch here which I thought, oh, is that some moisture from the wood? Left it overnight, but I came back, just ironed back over it, completely disappeared. So if you get a little sort of hazy area that doesn't look nice and glossy like this, 90% is going to be adhesive that's not actually just gone off. So if you just heat that, you'll find that that will just seems to knock that off. And there we go, ready for a test flight.